Look, I was on the city council. I was in a super minority on the city council in Memphis, but I was able to get things done. All the hell raising I did, ultimately President Trump sent the Memphis Safe Task Force down there. They've cut crime in half, and they've rescued 150 missing kids. And that alone is worth the price of admission. Well, remember what I said about being a successful business owner. Just make a decision and act on it. I started out having to be persistent and fight like hell just to get things done. We have enough talkers in Congress. We don't have enough doers.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Rutherford County GOP Podcast. I'm Matt Harriman here with my co-host, Ross Bradley, and today we are joined by State Senator Brent Taylor, a successful businessman, conservative leader, and candidate for the newly drawn 9th Congressional District. Senator Taylor represents Shelby County in the Tennessee Senate, has spent decades serving the people of West Tennessee. From becoming the youngest person ever elected to the Memphis City Council, to building one of the largest family-owned funeral businesses in the Mid-South, to serving in the Tennessee Senate, Brent has built a reputation as a principled conservative and one of the state's most outspoken voices when it comes to public safety and crime. Now he's seeking to take that fight to Washington, D.C. As a candidate for Congress. And Senator Taylor, I personally am very excited to have you on the podcast as a West Tennessee native myself from Bolivar. Still have a heart, even though I live here, for West Tennessee, and really do appreciate how you have been such a fighter for so long, especially since your time in the Senate for West Tennessee. So welcome to Rutherford County.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here. Matt, I'm glad I finally caught you because, as you know, you worked for the caucus for a while, and then you were with NRA. And by the time I got elected to the Senate, you left that. So I'm finally glad to catch up with you.
Absolutely.
So, and I'll tell you, the Matt Harriman name is legendary around the legislature. They still talk about the days of Matt Harriman being here advocating. So it's glad to finally catch up with you.
Yeah, you too. Absolutely. We're glad you're here.
That's good. That's good. We definitely have to leave that part in.
Ross is going to edit that out.
We'll have to cut that up and create some stories on that one. That's good. Well, Brent, thank you so much for joining us. You've had a successful career in business and in politics. Kind of tell us how that success has shaped who you are.
Well, kind of going back, I was born and raised in a small town. The local funeral home owner and my dad were hunting and fishing buddies growing up. And my dad owned a retail lumberyard and hardware store. That was the business I grew up in. And the local funeral home there they did like 40 funerals a year. It wasn't enough to even have a staff. So whenever he had a funeral, and I got into high school, whenever he'd have a funeral, he'd call over to my dad at the lumberyard and say, hey, Matt, can you put Brent in a suit and send him over to the funeral home? I need some help rolling a casket down the aisle, or I need him to run flowers to the cemetery. And so my dad had come out on the lumberyard. I'd be on the forklift, toting sheetrock, whatever I was doing, and say, hey, Tommy needs you over at the funeral home. Can you go over there, get dressed up, go over there and help him? So I would go get cleaned up, go to the funeral home, and would spend the rest of the next day or two helping out on the funeral. Now, to let you know, Ross, what I thought about stacking sheetrock and toting lumber at 17 years old, that I thought dealing with dead people would be an improvement in my lot in life. That lets you know what I thought about that. So when I finished high school, I went to mortuary school and then moved to Memphis and started working at a large funeral home there. And I did that for almost 20 years. And then I took out a home equity loan, took out all the equity in my house. My wife, Matt, had thought I'd lost my mind. She's like, we're doing what? And I said, we're going to take out all the equity in our home. I'm going to start a company and I'm going to buy funeral homes. So the ever-loving wife, she trusted me enough to sign the paperwork. So I took out that loan, started my company, and grew it to a chain of funeral homes. And I sold it in about 5 years ago to a private equity firm. The reason I tell that story, Ross, is that I think it's important that Tennessee's next congressman have that type of background of what it's like to be a business owner. And I can tell you, I've laid awake at night knowing I have to make payroll the next day and wondering, am I going to have enough money to make payroll? I've actually paid my employees and then didn't have enough money to pay myself. Or probably the most insulting check I ever wrote myself was I got a paycheck that was $10 one time. That was all I could afford to pay myself. And so I know what it's like to be a small business owner and to have to deal with government regulations and all the bureaucratic traps you have to run as a business owner. Now, during that time, I served on at every level of government. I served at the municipal level. I served on the county commission, served as chairman of the election commission, and more recently, the last term, I served as state senator. And I think that experience as well will help me be a better congressman, because I know what it's like when government sends down unfunded mandates, or worse yet, they give you mandates that they initially fund and then they only last for 3, 4, 5 years. And then local governments have to try to figure out how to pay for sometimes popular programs. So that's kind of my origin story and how my background influenced the type of elected official that I'm currently am as a state senator and who I hope to be as a congressman in D.C. representing the fine folks of District 9.
That's great. I think, so you alluded to this, and I mentioned it in the intro. You were the youngest person ever elected to the Memphis City Council. So what was it that motivated you to get involved in politics at 27 years old? Because I think you think of most 27-year-olds now, some of them are still in college. They're doing their 6th or 7th year, especially if they're playing football or something, and they just keep on playing. So what motivated you to get involved at such an early age?
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned 27 when I was elected to the city council. It actually goes back further than that. I grew up, like I said, in that small town, and I'm the middle of 3 siblings. I got an older brother and a younger sister. And my family was one that was very, not politically active, but they were opinionated about politics. I'll put it that way. Yeah. And so at the dinner table, we always argued about politics and what was going on. Of course, I grew up during the 80s when Reagan was president. So my dad and my family was always very supportive of President Reagan. And so that was around the dinner table, that was kind of what we heard a lot about. And interesting enough, when I was 13 years old, actually 12 or 13 years old, I convinced my mother to take me to the library because I said I wanted to do some studying. Well, she should have known that based on my grades, I was not interested in doing any studying. But she dutifully took me down to the library. She probably thought, well, here Brent is finally wanting to buckle down and study. I'll take him to the library. So she drops me off at the library. She makes the turn to head back home. I told her I would use the payphone to call her when I was ready to come home. She made the turn, and then I immediately walked across the street from the library where City Hall was in the little town I grew up in. And they were having the Board of Aldermen meeting. I knew that. That's why I strategically asked my mother on that day to take me to the library. So I went into the Mayor and Board of Aldermen meeting. And of course, the mayor was there. Small town, he knew who I was, my parents and all. He said, well, there's Mac and Marilyn Taylor's son, Brent. Do you have anything you want to say to the board? And I said, well, actually, I do. And I had this whole presentation spread out that nowhere in town did they fly the state flag, and that I thought that the Board of Aldermen ought to purchase a state flag and fly it with the American flag on the town square. And so somebody made a motion, they adopted it, and they approved it. And so I walked back across the street to the library and called my mother and said, I'm ready to come back. I thought that was the end of it, except the weekly newspaper came out the next week and said, it told the whole story about Mac and Marilyn Taylor's son, made a proposal to the City Board of Aldermen. And my mother comes in there mortified. She said, I thought you were going to study. I said, well, why do you ask? She said, well, it's in the paper. You went to the Mayor and Board of Aldermen meeting. So that was my first foray into politics, was walking across and participating in the Mayor and Board of Aldermen meeting that my parents knew nothing about. Fast forward, I moved to Memphis, and I started getting involved in campaigns and worked in a county mayor's race, got to know a lot of the campaign operatives, and then I ran for city council in 95 and was elected at the ripe old age of 26, 27 years old.
I love that because that's a lot of really my story growing up in Bolivar. I mean, my granddad owned a real estate and auction company. You know, Bolivar's real small, tight knit town, and he had an office just off the square, kind of like this where we're sitting, and everybody knew him, and he was on and off planning commission and different things, and so those are the stories of small town America that resonate with people and that shape people too.
Yeah.
And obviously spurred you on to get involved in politics at an early age with that, which I think is also, we talk about this a lot. Local politics is really some of the most important just because of the decisions that are made at city halls and county commissions and how they really, in a lot more ways, affect your daily life.
Yeah.
So
no doubt, absolutely. I mean, it's so cool to hear you talking about kind of that process of thinking, and what that tells me is like you were prepared for the opportunity. And I'd like to transition back to your experience as a successful business owner, because I think you're right. I think Tennessee has always loved to elect business leaders in their jobs. What are some of the skills you felt like you learned? I mean, you mentioned balancing budgets and those types of things and dealing with, government regulations, but give us a little bit more detail about what you learned as owning your own business that's helping you kind of in this stage of your life.
Yeah. So, I think the best thing that I took away from being a business owner, one, was not being afraid to make a decision. I used to tell my staff at the funeral homes all the time, I was like, look, there's more money lost in indecision than was ever lost in a bad decision. Just take the information you have available, make a decision and move forward. And you won't always make the right decision, but once you realize it was not the best decision, you can always back up and pursue a different avenue. But just to sit there with this paralysis through analysis, trying to ensure that you never lose a dollar in business, I think is detrimental. So it's about being decisive and being a doer, being an implementer, and that's the biggest thing I think that has influenced me as an elected official that I learned from being my own boss at the funeral home and owning my own business was being a doer. I mean, we have enough talkers in Congress. We don't have enough doers. And so I think that's where small business owners or business owners in general make really good leaders, because they're not afraid to make decisions. And I think that was a skill that I learned as a business owner.
Yeah. So before we kind of transition to talk a little bit more about Memphis and public safety and come out of this kind of segment, what advice would you give young conservatives who are considering public service or just looking to get more involved in public life?
To do it in whatever form that takes, whether it's volunteering in a campaign, whether it's running for office. I mean, I'm proof positive that you can live in a community only about 4 or 5 years, be young, and run for office and be elected. And so if that is your passion to want to serve your community in elected office, even though you're young, just do it. If your passion is, Matt, to manage campaigns as you've done, just do that, because not everyone wants to be a candidate. It may be that you want to pursue a business interest first. There are a lot of people who have business careers that later in life get involved in politics. And if they don't feel they're quite ready to run for office or to manage a campaign, go be successful in whatever chosen field you have chosen, and pursue that and be successful in that. And I think it's also important to make sure that if you're in a room, that the only reason people know you is not because of politics. I think it's important for people to know that you're a business owner, you're a family man, that you have interest beyond just being an elected official. I think a lot of times people view elected officials as career politicians, and I would encourage people to be successful in other endeavors as well as pursuing interest in government. But main thing is just do it.
That's good. That's good advice. That is, we have some great elected officials here in Rutherford County at all levels of
I
government.
serve with a couple of them.
But we always struggle trying to get that next generation of young people to be willing to step up to serve, to do exactly what you said, serve on campaigns. We're getting ready to run through a general election for our county officials, and so we need those folks that are willing to go out and knock doors and help make sure that we get good people elected. And it's a great training ground for the next generation. So appreciate you sharing those thoughts.
It is. And Ross, you mentioned it's important that if you're a young person, you want to get involved, and as I said, just do it. You shouldn't aim for the stars. Start small. Start with the school board, running for school board, or the city council.
I'm not sure that's a small one. That one may be the toughest one here.
Yeah, you're right. That may be the case, but it's small enough that you could actually could win the election by enough door knocking and enough handshaking that you could do that. But run for school board or city council or county commission or even the legislature, particularly the House, because the districts are somewhat small. But just serve your community. And, congressional districts or congressional races are difficult and expensive. And it's really, really hard to go from a standing start of having never served in any kind of capacity to want to run for Congress. So,
yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, bro.
So obviously one of the issues you've become most known for is your focus on crime and public safety. So for our listeners who are not as familiar with West Tennessee, how would you describe the challenges that Memphis has faced in recent years? Well,
Matt, you're from Bolivar there at Hardeman County, and you understand the challenges because, I have focused on Memphis, and my initiative while I was in the state Senate was to make Memphis Matter. And it was never, it was more than just Memphis proper. The Make Memphis Matter movement was really about all of West Tennessee because the crime that is and was in Memphis didn't stay in Memphis. I mean, it traveled right out Highway 64 through Fayette and Hardeman counties and beyond. It went up Highway 51 into Tipton and Lauderdale County and right out I-40 all the way up to Madison County, where Jackson is still influenced by Memphis crime. And everybody... There was no sense of urgency among the elected officials to do anything about it. It was just this kind of resignation that this is just life in a big town, big city. And then you take that complacency that people had, and then you add to the fact that a Soros-funded DA was able to get elected, and that was a toxic combination because he took that complacency and just put it on steroids because he refused to prosecute people. He said from the beginning that he wanted to rehabilitate people. And I used to argue with him and say, look, if you want to save souls, you need to resign DA and go join the seminary, and you can become a pastor and save souls and leave prosecuting criminals to serious people who want to put people in jail. So that was kind of where I began my work. And I started raising 10 kinds of different hell to try to convince people that we didn't have to live that way. And it all started with me changing some laws at the state level in terms of how judges and judicial commissioners were doing bail. The judges down in Shelby County, they had entered into a standing bail agreement, a standing bail order that basically said that they were going to use an ability to pay calculator. So literally, Ross, somebody gets arrested, the first thing you ask them is how much money you got in your pocket. And based on what you said, they'd plug that into this calculator, and more times than not, it would spit out that they can't afford any bail and they should be released without any cash bail. So I got the law changed. We cannot use those ability to pay calculators in Tennessee. And so it effectively ended Tennessee's version of cashless bail. That's not all I was able to do. We had a couple of rogue judges that just would not, they pushed back and wanted to let these violent criminals out without bail. Give you one quick example. There was a guy that shot 5 people at the Rail Garden restaurant in Memphis. And that qualifies as a mass shooting. He shot 5 people, and the judge let him out on his own recognizance without any cash bail. So I stayed on him I stayed on him. And until finally, and I filed ethics complaints against him with the Board of Judicial Conduct, and finally He folded like a fourth grade love letter and decided I'm hanging it up. He left. I got another judge run off. And I have effectively boxed in our DA where we now have accountability measures in place about the Memphis Safe Task Force. Maybe we can talk about that later. So crime had gotten out of control, and with all the hell raising I did, ultimately President Trump sent the Memphis Safe Task Force down there. They've cut crime in half, and they've rescued 150 missing kids. And that alone is worth the price of admission. So things have gotten much better. And the biggest thing is that Memphians now realize they don't have to live that way, that they can live in a safe community.
Brent, the one thing I'm kind of getting to know about you is you're super persistent. How much of that has to do with living in Memphis in a community that's not predominantly Republican, that you're constantly having to stand up for what you believe in? I feel like that starts to kind of seep into other areas of your life. Has that been a big part of your story?
It is. It's been that persistence paid off in business because it didn't matter what the challenges were. I needed to succeed, and you don't always succeed at everything. I made investments in my business that didn't pan out, and my dad used to say, if you've never lost money in a business deal, you weren't trying hard enough to make any money. But that persistence, you just keep persisting to ensure that you're successful in business. And I've taken that same persistence at government as well. And look, I was on the city council. I was in the super minority on the city council in Memphis, but I was able to get things done.
How did you cross the lines and be able to get things done?
Well, it's about convincing people from the other side that our conservative principles, and sometimes you got to package it differently to them. It just comes second nature to us because we know that the conservative principles are the best governing principles. But with them, you got to break it down into bite sizes and kind of lead them along to get them to support some of our initiatives. And I was very successful in the city council in getting the other side to come over and vote with me.
That seems like a really important characteristic to have going into Washington. In Tennessee, we're a supermajority. The Republicans can pretty much do what they want to do. Not so much in Washington, D.C.
It's not. And I will tell you, being in the state Senate was the first time that I have been in a majority on a legislative body that I've served on. And it's great, Matt. I mean, you just have an idea everything's going to pass 27-6. But I did not start out that way. I started out having to be persistent and fight like hell just to get things done. And I was successful at the municipal level, the county commission, and even on the chairman of the election commission, even though we had a majority, with 5 members, it just takes one to kind of gum up the works there. But that persistence is very helpful for somebody that serves in a legislative body. You just can't take no for an answer. That's why, Ross, it was very good that I was ugly in high school because I got turned down a lot for dates. I was told no a lot, and I was very persistent until I finally found somebody to go to the prom with me.
Well, you alluded to this in one of your answers on crime, but you obviously launched this Make Memphis Matter initiative that's really, outside of it being something that you started, has really become a rallying cry for a lot of people in Memphis and in West Tennessee who truly want to see Memphis and West Tennessee thrive again. So talk a little bit more about that initiative, what it means to you, and what kind of inspired the effort.
Yeah, so what inspired the effort was when I ran for the Senate, Matt, it didn't matter what list you looked at. Most dangerous cities, Memphis was on that list, and Memphis would be first, second, or third. And it wasn't just a list of most dangerous cities in the state or most dangerous cities in the nation. It was most dangerous cities in the world. And I mean, we would be ahead of Mexico City or Baghdad, Iraq. I mean, I saw lists that we were ahead of them. And so that's what precipitated the Make Memphis Matter initiative, because I wanted to create a rallying cry, just like after David Crockett, and I hope we'll talk about David Crockett later, but just like David Crockett, when he was killed in the Alamo, the battle cry for Texas independence was remember the Alamo. And that's what I wanted, was to make Memphis matter. And I wanted to get better outcomes for Memphis from Nashville so that we could help fight crime, improve our education system, and create better economic opportunities for Memphians. So I started it, and we had to start with crime. Nothing else mattered. I mean, we've got other issues in Memphis that we need to deal with, but crime is the number one issue. And so we focused on that. And my critics were saying, well, we have to address the underlying causes of crime, which is poverty. We don't have the time to do that. And the example I would use was, it's just like if I dropped on the floor right now with a heart attack and they rushed me over to the hospital, and once they stabilized my heart, they're not gonna, when they roll me into the emergency room, they're not going to roll me in there and then say, you should really cut back on your cholesterol. You should exercise more. You know what the first thing they're going to do? They're going to stabilize my heart. Once you stabilize my heart, then they can say, you need to change your lifestyle choices so you're not back at the same position. That's where we were with crime in Memphis. We had to take acute action to immediately lower crime. Once we get crime down to a manageable level, then we can begin to maybe address some of the underlying causes. But make no mistake, the underlying cause of crime is criminals. And if we put them in jail, they can't commit additional crimes. So we had to do that before we then begin to tackle education. And you got to deal with education before you can really create robust economic opportunities for the people of Memphis and Shelby County. And the last thing I'll say on this, if we're going to improve the crime stats for Tennessee, you have to do it in Memphis. That's the one place where you can apply resources that will move the needle the most. If we're going to improve educational outcomes for students, you have to do it in Memphis. And if you're going to improve economic opportunities, once we fix those two things, the best place to do it is in Memphis. I mean, Middle Tennessee has seen explosive growth. Tennessee, if we had Memphis being the next southern city, like Nashville's been over the last decade, there'd be no stop in Tennessee. And Tennessee will never reach her full potential as long as Memphis is sliding into the river, and we got to stop the slide.
Well, I think for folks that are watching this, that are saying, what difference does it make what happens in Memphis? I'm in Rutherford County. I think the interesting thing about that is it shows me that you're able to identify a major problem that's been a problem for a long time, and then get an actionable solution to fix the problem. I mean, I'm hearing the crime numbers are, 50% down?
50%.
That's amazing. I mean, what I think we need to think about in Rutherford County is, how does that impact us, is you get stuff done. You're a problem solver, and you identify the problem, and more importantly, you fixed it, which seems to me to be one of the biggest problems in Washington. Is it doesn't seem like we ever fix the problem. Tell us how you go about doing that. I think that's something we need to get better at.
Well, you're right. And the other thing is, that's what I want to do as your next congressman, is Nashville's crime problem is just about as bad as what Memphis's crime problem was, except they talked about it in Memphis and they didn't or don't in Nashville. And this is a horrible example, and I will hear from all my campaign people say, you shouldn't say that, but I'm say it anyway. It's almost like Memphis's crime problem was like a fever blister on your lip. You see it, everybody sees it, and you kind of self-conscious about it, like, I know it's a fever blister, so you talk about it. Nashville's crime problem is just as bad, but it's more like an STD. Nobody knows it, you can't see it, nobody talks about it, but it's just as bad. And so that's why it's important we have a congressman that has worked with President Trump and his administration to solve the crime problem in Memphis, because I want to take what I've learned and bring that to Nashville, because Nashville's crime problem doesn't stop at the Davidson County line. It comes right down Highway 24, right down Highway 64, into these smaller communities that don't necessarily have the resources to be able to fight and combat that crime. So what I want to do is to take what I've learned in Memphis and apply that from Congress to Nashville, and so we can stop the spread of this violent crime into these small rural communities that have a unique Tennessee way of life, and we need to protect that.
Well, it seems like a lot of things you're talking about seem like common sense, but the thing about it I think that's interesting is the fact that you're actually able to execute the plan. And I think that is so needed right now in our country, is being able to actually execute the plan. Man, we need that so bad. So thank you for doing that.
Well, remember what I said about being a successful business owner. Just make a decision and act on it. And that's what I've done in my life in elected office is identify a problem, figure out how we can fix it, and act on it.
So you've touched a little bit along the way about, what unique skill sets you bring to the table and why you're a good choice for this and why it's the right time for you to serve. So tell us a little bit about, let's kind of transition into talking about your run for Congress, and tell us a little bit more about what are your priorities going to be, because it's obvious we talked a lot about your priorities in the state Senate. Will those continue in Congress, or will you take on new priorities and initiatives?
Yeah, Matt, I appreciate that. I want to continue doing in Congress what I've been doing in the state Senate. One of the priorities I will have is illegal immigration. I have worked on that in the state Senate. There was a bill that I helped get passed that dealt with sheriff's departments across the state, making sure that they participate in the 287G program. Only the government could come up with a title like 287G, but basically what it says is there's an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between the local law enforcement and federal immigration officials, that when they have an illegal alien that they have in their custody, that they notify ICE. So that was one of the things that I supported and worked hard to try to get passed. I followed that up with a law that I sponsored that says that when ICE has been notified and ICE issues a detainer, that the local law enforcement has to hold that illegal alien for the full 48 hours to give ICE time to come and make the arrest and get them deported. What was happening, Ross, was that sheriff's departments were notifying ICE pursuant to the 287G program, but then they were immediately releasing them. And that creates a situation we saw up in Minnesota where they were just releasing these people that they had in custody, and then ICE has to go into the community and try to find them in much more dangerous situations than trying to get them in custody and in the jail. And that we saw that people lost their lives as a result. So that's one of the things we did. Another thing, bill that I carried this last session that passed said that if you are an immigrant, legal or not, well, if you're not a legal immigrant, if you're here illegally, you can't get a driver's license. But if you're here on a work visa and you want to get a driver's license, you have to take that test in English. Because we have seen what happens as a funeral director. I've seen what happens when people who can't read English, they don't understand our traffic laws. We drive on the wrong side of the road from the rest of the world, and they get involved in accidents and killing Tennesseans. And so these are the things on immigration I want to continue in Congress. The other thing is violent crime. We've touched on that. I want to make sure that we push back against these Soros-funded DAs and we stop violent crime from spreading into our smaller communities. And then the third thing, Matt, was really kind of surprising to me as I've talked to Tennesseans during this race, is China. And you would think the state Senate would not be a place you could stand up to China. But I have in a couple of ways. One, we passed legislation China can't buy farmland. I actually carried the law in the Senate that says that China can't buy our mineral rights that are in the ground. And I also passed a law this last session that stops China from funding our lawsuits. What they were doing is they would find, Ross, where a citizen is suing an American company, and China would come in to the trial lawyers and say, we'll pay for that lawsuit. Whatever it takes, we'll pay for it. So the plaintiff's lawyers are saying, great, we'll let somebody else pay for this, and then the plaintiff doesn't have to. So, but what happens is in all the discovery materials, China gets access to that because they're funding that lawsuit. So they're getting proprietary information, they're getting trade secrets, they're getting intellectual property information, sending that all back to China where they're counterfeiting our products and then flooding our market with counterfeit products that they were able to get the plans for from the lawsuit. So we put a stop to that in Tennessee, and that was a bill that I carried. So those are the things that I want to continue doing in Congress, which is I've already been doing in the state Senate.
Going back saying the 287G program, am I saying that right? 287G? That program is huge for Rutherford County. I mean, we are getting ready to have to build a new jail because of overcrowding. We certainly don't want to release criminals, especially illegal criminals, back into society if they've committed crimes, and especially violent crimes. But we can't keep them forever. And so thank you for freeing that up, because we as citizens of Rutherford County realize that, if those folks are in our jail, we're paying for them. And so to be able to make that process smoother, we don't want to have to go build capacity for folks that we just haven't cleaned up the system. So thank you for helping move that along. We were talking a little bit before we got started about China and some of the misinformation campaigns that they're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think folks would be interested to kind of hear some of those things.
Yeah, so, data centers are a really controversial topic now. And look, all of us we hold conflicting views when it comes to data centers. On one hand, we all have a smartphone in our pocket. We all are quick to get on our phone to Google something or to use artificial intelligence to help us understand something. And so we have that on one hand, but then we also are trying to balance that to ensure that data centers, which it takes data centers to be able to have access to all that information that's on our phone, trying to figure out where to place these data centers. And I have had experience with that down in my home county, dealing with a data center. And what we need to do is we need to do a better job of figuring out where to place these. But we need to figure that out, because I think China is maybe engaging in a lot of misinformation and disinformation here in an effort to try to get us to put moratoriums in place on these data centers so that China can leapfrog ahead of us in the artificial intelligence space. And they will have not only a competitive advantage, but they will also have a military advantage if they're able to leapfrog us in terms of artificial intelligence. So look, there are things we need to manage about data centers. We need to be smarter about where we place them. We need to make sure that people, Tennesseans, are safe from data centers and are not located near their homes. But we can't afford to have a moratorium just completely on the data centers for fear that China leapfrogs us, and then they will be at a competitive advantage, but also a military advantage.
I think that's really interesting. Matt and I just did a podcast with Chris Jones, who's the CEO of Middle Tennessee Electric, and he mentioned the same thing, that it's a national security issue. And I agree 100% too. We don't need to just put a blanket, let's approve them all, because we certainly don't need to do that. But we need to be objective in the way we're thinking about it, because I never thought about the fact that China might be pushing a disinformation movement through social media and all different avenues to cause us to oppose something that really would give us a competitive advantage on a national scale. So that's really fascinating. Thanks for bringing that up.
Well, yeah, and of course, Matt will tell you that in all types of development, you look at each development and you make determinations whether or not it is a fit for that community. Because I did that when I was on City Council and County Commission. That's what we did, was look at zoning projects and development projects. And not all of them are the same, and you can't have a blanket policy on every housing development project. And I don't think you can have a blanket plan for data centers. I think it's up to the local communities to make those decisions. I mean, local city council or board of aldermen or county commission, they're going to make the best decision for their community. Otherwise, they're going to hear about it at the grocery store. And but we need to be careful that we don't just do a moratorium on data centers because China could leapfrog ahead of us. Matter of fact, the only data center bill that passed the legislature this last session was a bill that I sponsored. And basically what it says is that if a data center is going to come into a community and they're using a certain threshold of electricity, that they have to bring their own power source with them, that they can't rely on the ratepayers to make the needed infrastructure improvements to support these data centers, that they have to pay for that. And I think that's the first step in making sure that we regulate and put data centers in their proper place, but we need to make sure we don't create a situation where China can leapfrog us.
Let me ask this question to you too, because I think it's, as we're looking at Tennessee and the impacts of Tennessee on the nation, Tennessee has one congressional district right now that is not conservative. If District 9 becomes a Republican-controlled district, all districts in Tennessee now are conservative. What are we able to bring from Tennessee to the rest of the country as a full conservative state?
Well, I think the one thing that we will have is we won't have the pushback that we've had with Congressman Cohen down in Memphis. And, the critics of the redistricting plan have said, well, these districts are spread out and you got too many different groups. You've got, urban core, you've got suburbanites, you've got rural areas, and that they don't have any communities of interest. That's a big word the Democrats use during the redistricting, is that we don't have any communities of interest. If you look at these congressional districts that we've drawn, they all look like Tennessee. You've got urban centers, you've got suburban communities in Shelby County and Fayette County, like you have in Williamson and Rutherford and Murray. And then you've also got a lot of rural areas. So these districts look like Tennessee, and I think as a result, it forces those of us who are running to reflect more accurately Tennessee values. And those are values that support our Western Christian civilized way that we live, and we need to protect that. And when you've got somebody that only answers to an urban core, that's where you get the crazies, all the purple-haired, weathered hippies that are influencing like a Congressman Cohen, because he's just representing an urban core where all the crazies are concentrated. So this allows these districts to look more like Tennessee and elect congressmen who understand all of Tennessee.
Well, we're getting close to wrapping up here. One of the things that we've had a lot of fun doing recently with several of our guests is kind of a lightning round ahead of our closing. So I'm going to ask you, half a dozen just quick answer questions for you. So
I think I'm ready.
Try not to trip you up. Favorite president?
I would say Teddy Roosevelt.
Most influential book you've read?
Adios, America. I encourage everybody to read that. That was really the game plan that President Trump used in 2016 when he came down that escalator. He basically gave a synopsis of Adios, America.
Most underrated conservative leader?
Interestingly enough, there's a congressman from Texas named Brandon Gill. I think he is underrated conservative, but only because he's not been in Congress long. I think he will ultimately be a rising star in Congress. And if you're not familiar with him, I would encourage you to look him up. One of his quotes that really stuck with me is, in Congress, they got a lot of talkers, but not many doers. And that's really resonated with me as I've campaigned around District 9.
That's good. This one might get you in trouble. Memphis barbecue or Nashville hot chicken?
I tell you what, I like that hot slaw they have over in East Tennessee. So, but barbecue is good. I have last 35 years, I've really feasted on Rendezvous ribs, and I encourage you to go down there. But as my time in the Senate, I've learned to appreciate Nashville hot chicken. So how's that for a good,
that's good,
balanced answer?
That's good. Well, and we have Central Barbecue now.
That's
so,
right.
You can. That's when I was still spending a lot of time in Nashville. I'd go down to the Gulch and grab Central Barbecue. Coffee or Diet Coke? I like my sweet tea like I like my Tennessee, and that's with a lot of ice. That's good. So, biggest challenge facing America?
Immigration.
And then we'll wrap up with this one. What is one thing people either misunderstand or don't know about Brent Taylor?
I think that I'm not as big an a-hole as everybody thinks I am, because it's that persistence. It's me going after a goal. And I will tell you, in my Senate district, I have worked hard to make it safe, and I've been successful. We've cut crime in half, but I've also created a lot of enemies along the way. I have all the right enemies, Ross. And I think those folks would, if you look at social media, they dominate with all the hate, but I just persevere. I've got a goal in mind, and I know what I want to do, and I really don't give a damn what the haters think.
That's good. That's good. When future Americans look back on this moment in time, what, in your opinion, do you think conservatives are getting right that we'll look back and say, I sure am glad they did that then?
I think embracing President Trump's America First agenda, I'm going to tell you, and this will sound hyperbolic, but I don't think it is. I think it's the truth. Had he not been reelected this second term, I'm not sure where we'd be as a nation. And I think 100 years from now, they'll look back and see that this really was, that 2024 really was a pivotal election. And that, we always hear every election is the most important in our lifetime. This one truly was. And for America to elect somebody who would have withered under if it had been any other candidate, they would have withered under the weight of the prosecution, persecution that President Trump withstood, and he came into office with a mandate. I think 100 years from now, they'll look back and see how pivotal this moment was, and that we chose correctly. And we just need a Congress now. We need to keep the majority, because if we don't, he will lose the next 2 years, his last 2 years in office. He will lose being able to implement the America First agenda and move the country ahead of where maybe the Democrats cannot mess it up in a term. So that's why I want to be elected to serve as that impeachment insurance for President Trump.
Well, Brent, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time today. I know we have a primary coming up August the 6th. Early voting's before that. As the Rutherford County GOP, we are not endorsing you as a candidate. We appreciate you being willing to come and share. We open that up to any candidate that's running for Congress in this District 9, which covers really the northern part of Rutherford County. And so check Brent out. Brent, how can we get more information if we want to get more information about your campaign?
Well, if you want to see some entertaining stuff, go to my social media, Brent Taylor on X and Facebook. It's worth watching. But also BrentTaylorForCongress.com. You can learn more about me. And if I could just say one thing, I'm a history buff. I really enjoy history. And District 9 is really interesting because this is the district that David Crockett once represented. And we all know the story of David Crockett, who served in the legislature when Murfreesboro was the capital. But he ran his last re-election for Congress. He stood on the courthouse steps, they counted the votes, and he came up just a little bit short. And he turned around to the assembled crowd there and he said, well, I'm going to Texas and all you folks can go to hell. I think, Ross, I've got that same Tennessee grit that David Crockett has, but I would say it a little bit differently. And that is, God willing, and with your votes, I'm going to Congress and I'm going to give the Democrats hell.
That's good. I was in D.C. a few weeks ago and saw some folks from Texas, and they were sure glad we had Davy Crockett from Tennessee.
That's right. Hey, but for Tennessee, there would be no Texas.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the content. Make sure you check out those social media references that Brent had given you. And make sure you leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. We want to hear what you want to hear. That helps Matt and I plan the next podcast. And so if you like this podcast, make sure you give us a like and subscribe to our channel. Make sure you share it with your friends, and we'll keep bringing these videos to you. Thanks for joining us today.